Hang on a moment. Right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carmen Dillon, Chief Officer, Welling and Hatfield Community Service. Just a moment. This call's not going to stop. Welcome to the webinar hosted by Community First and ourselves. This is one of several webinars that's happening around the county. Just to let you know that the event is being recorded, and if you are unhappy with that, then please leave your cameras off. If you have any questions, please use the chat and we will answer as many as we can. Over to you, Gary.
Thanks very much. I'll just take everybody through the agenda, but just before I do that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm one of the assistant managers at Communities First, and I look after Refugee Response Project. So the agenda, as you can see, nice and full, and hopefully we will cover something for everyone. Carmen has just introduced the webinar. We then move on to employment support, which Anne Stokes is going to present. I'll give a very brief overview of host guest numbers as they currently stand. And then my colleague Christine Halpin will present a slide from Mind in Mid Hearts on emotional well-being of sponsor support. Then Daniel Levy will present an emotional well-being for guests slide. And then we have a safeguarding presentation from Claire Williams, a school admissions presentation from Eileen Hargrave, and a housing update presented by David Truick, and then a citizens advice presentation from Melanie. And then you'll hear from Carmen once again, just to close, and also talk about the help and support that we will be providing. Go to the next presentation, and I'll just cover a brief overview with you, just in terms of the current picture regarding numbers of guests and sponsors in the area. So I've pulled out a few facts for you. We've actually got across Hearts 2.3 guests per sponsor on average. In St Albans, 21% of guests and hosts across Hertfordshire are currently residing in St Albans. The figure for Hartsmere is 7%, and Welling and Hatfield has 8% of guests. The table on the far right shows the total number of registered sponsors, including those still awaiting guests. We are currently lacking statistics for Ukrainians that are living locally under the family visa scheme. So that's just a general overview of the current status. And I'm going to just now move on to our next slide and presentation, and over to Christine, who's going to present this.
And I am just going to speak very briefly about, on behalf of Mind in Mid Hearts, because they weren't able to be with us today, about the mental health and well-being of hosts and the hosts' families. Understandably, there has been a huge amount of emphasis on the well-being of Ukrainian guests as they arrive, because of the situation that they have left and the unfamiliar environment that they've had to enter. And so, of course, that has been stressed. But recently there's been an increasing conversation about the well-being of hosts and their families, because as the situation extends and goes on longer than some initially planned. So what Mind in Mid Hearts have asked me to really stress is that for hosts and their families, this may well be a stressful and difficult time. The hosting situation has gone on longer than some anticipated, and the people that have arrived are many are traumatized and, you know, concerned about their future. what we would like to say, and what Mind in Mid Hearts would like to say, is that there is lots of support available, that it's normal to have these feelings of sort of frustration, guilt, and possibly sometimes even anger. And what we would like everybody here to do who works with sponsors, or the sponsors themselves that are here, is to recognise that those feelings are okay, and to recognise that there is lots of support available for hosts, including the peer support sessions, which happen weekly across most districts in the county. And as well, I would direct you to the Living Well courses that Mind in Mid Hearts have. There are courses around anxiety, learning to relax, managing change and loss, staying calm. And lots of those courses will be relevant to hosts who are finding this situation much more difficult than they anticipated. Carmen will talk a little bit at the end about other support that's available. And so we just really wanted to flag up that these feelings seem to be quite common, and that there is lots of help out there. And we would encourage everyone to signpost hosts onto that support. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christine. I'm just going to move on to the next slide and welcome Danielle Levy. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you very much. So I'm Danielle. I'm the Head of Complex Needs and Community Services at Hertfordshire Mind Network. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about our new Flourish service, which is our mental health support service for refugees. So this service has been up and running now since the 1st of July. And this is for anyone aged 18 plus in the county who's presenting with a mental health need and is a refugee. So as I said, it's a county-wide service. We offer up to 10 sessions. What this looks like is it's outreach support, so we can come to people's homes where they are, we can meet them in the community, or we can meet them at one of our wellbeing centres across the county. We give them up to 10 sessions of this kind of support, but actually we try to be very flexible. So if people are presenting with lots of needs and they need longer than 10 sessions, then we feel it's really important that they're able to access that. So 10 sessions is kind of the starting point. And the kind of support is emotional and practical support, but with mental health at the forefront. So we do believe that if people's kind of practical needs aren't met, then sometimes they can't begin addressing their mental health needs. So we do think it's really important kind of basic needs are met first, but the service is essentially about mental health. We work really closely with translation services. So if people don't speak English, that isn't a problem. We can bring a translator alongside us in the community, or sometimes if people prefer appointments over the phone, then we can do that too. And the kind of support is very much holistic support. So we're looking at the whole picture, what's presenting, and anyone can refer into this service. So we've had lots of self-referrals, other professionals can refer, or it might be that people are staying with host families and they're worried about someone who's staying with them and they would like to refer in. And it is very, very varied, the project. I think that's what we're seeing. Every single person we see has very, very different needs. So we're supporting with all areas of mental health. So some people might have anxiety and they're struggling to leave the house, adjusting to a new culture, and we can support with that. Some people are very, very depressed, and some people are actually coming over. They had an established mental health needs back in their country. So it might be, that they've got what's considered a more serious mental health issues such as schizophrenia, and that's fine, and we can support with that as well. We've got very good links in with the mental health team and statutory services at HPFT. So if we feel actually need some input from secondary services, then we can refer in, and we've got a referral pathway in with them, so people can get more specialised support from secondary services if that's what they need. And the idea is it's quite an early intervention service. So we're looking at as well at managing those episodes of crisis so that possibly relationships don't break down with people's host families. So, you know, we are supporting host families where necessary. You know, if there's difficulties between the host and the people that are staying there, we can actually send someone in to sit and talk with both of them to try and find a middle ground. And we're also what we're doing as part of the offer is peer support groups across the county at our centres. So we've got one set up at various places, and that's kind of a constantly evolving process wherever the need is. And we're also looking to set up a group for hosts so that they can feel supported, and that's something that's in process at the moment. So, you know, we are looking at kind of cultural transitions and what it's actually like and how that impacts people's mental health, and also integrating into this country. You know, what we're finding is that there's some people that, you know, they were living very, very differently back in their country, and it's, you know, even little things like you know, bedtimes for children and things like that. So, you know, we're managing that transition into this country, but always with, you know, well-being and people's mental health at the forefront. And if you want to refer into the service, the email address is on the screen. You can call or you can email, and we'll get you on the list for a one-to-one outreach worker. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Danielle. That's great. So the next presentation is safeguarding, and I'm going to introduce you to Claire Williams. Thanks, Claire.
Hi everyone, my name's Claire Williams. I'm a service manager with Children's Services in Hertfordshire. I'm going to do a short presentation just letting you know about kind of some of the principles that we work under in Children's Services, to give you some links to if you need to make a referral in relation to any child that you might be concerned about, and also some other links in relation to general safeguarding issues, as you can't really cover everything safeguarding in a 5-minute slot. But just talk to you about some of the principles that we work with families in the UK. So we're embedded by our primary piece of legislation is something called the Children Act 1989. So that was a piece of legislation put together, multi-agency, multi-party piece of legislation put together a very long time ago. But the principles under which that piece of legislation was put together have remained firm in relation to how we work with children and families. And basically it sets out under what circumstances would the state intervene in the family life of a child. So some of the principles that it works on is that it works on a principle of support. So we provide services to children and their parents on the basis that we want to put the right response at the right time with the right service. And what we believe is that most of the time that service should be done at a local, voluntary and partnership-based service. And we work with a multitude of partners across different agencies: police, schools, health, voluntary sector, you know, almost every partner you could think of that works with children, that we're working alongside them. And most services that protect and support children and their families are provided by our partner agencies. Where Children's Services tend to step in is where we consider that a level of state intervention is required, and that is defined by those principles. So to give you some examples, and this is where we don't actually use the word child protection very often anymore, but I wanted to kind of use the word so that you can be very clear about what we consider the kind of intervention where, if you were worried about a child and you didn't know whether you needed to talk to the parent about it first, this is where you might think twice about talking to the parent first. So the kind of examples we're talking about are sexual abuse of a child, including child sexual exploitation. Some of the things you might want to look out for with some of the children of your hosts are the exposure to risks in the community, such as gangs, sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. then also physical abuse of the child. In the UK, it is currently not completely illegal to smack your own child, though I remember a time when actually they were debating, for instance, that I was born just after them banning teachers smacking children. So as a culture, we've changed a lot in 50 years. And I think that obviously there is a lot of debate about whether parents should smack children. But at the moment, it's not completely illegal. But what we would do is provide support to parents if they were smacking their children, and advising them about better ways of managing their child's behaviour. However, what we consider physical abuse of the child is a very serious assault on a child which has caused an injury. And in those circumstances, we would urge you to make a referral and not necessarily talk to the parent first, but make a direct referral to Children's Services. So talking about neglect, now neglect is a very wide kind of scenario facing children, and everyone's got a different idea about what's acceptable living conditions for children. When we consider neglect from a child protection point of view, we're talking about persistent and consistent neglect, which is having a significant impact on that child's life. And in the same way, emotional abuse. We're not talking about the odd parent who shouts at a child because they reach the end of their tether. I'm sure every parent has done that at some point, but we're talking about the persistent and consistent putting down of a child, but also exposure to domestic abuse, which is prevalent kind of in many relationships in the country, unfortunately. And we've got a wide range of supports to put in place to protect children, but children are always affected by it. And then I mentioned before contextual safeguarding. But where we're talking about a kind of scenario where you might want to talk to the parent, we would encourage you, in fact, to talk to the parent beforehand, before making a referral to Children's Services, are where the child's got disability, where they've got developmental concerns, where the parent is struggling to meet some of their child's needs. And if they weren't provided with some support, it might lead to the neglect of that child. In addition, a parent might be struggling to meet their adolescent's needs, might find it difficult to kind of set boundaries and keep them in and keep them protected from the exploitation that might be surrounding them. Excuse me. And also, a parent might be struggling with their own mental health, and you've already heard about the supports that are in place for mental health from mental health services, but also they might have learning difficulties or physical health needs. So I'm going to talk about where you go get your referral in a minute, but what will happen to your referral is once you put a referral in, we've got a customer service centre who will process that referral and send it through to our gateway service, who will determine the right response for that referral. So that might include gathering more information in our MASH, putting it through to our safeguarding adolescent hub, or putting it through to our Families First Triage, which is our umbrella organisation for providing early help. However, if it's a serious child protection concern, then it will go through to our assessment or joint child protection investigation team. And if the child's got a disability, it will go through to the 0 to 25 service. Once, if it goes through to an assessment service, then that assessment will assess, make an assessment, complete a plan and provide some intervention support and then review. All of this we will try to do in partnership with parents. So I've just given you one link. It would be, this is the best link to go to in terms of if you want to think about making a referral. So please go to that link and it will tell you how to do so. And then some useful resources if you want to read more about child protection and how we manage it in Hertfordshire, then please go to those links. If you want to find out more about safeguarding, then please contact me via Gary, and I can see if I can get some additional support or training in for you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire. That was really thorough. Thank you.
So at Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council, and alongside my colleagues from St Albans and Hertsmere, have been asked to run through some details about what happens in terms of housing options and you know, what we do and how we do it and what options are available for those families that are basically needing alternative accommodation. So I did have a concern about the slides only having Welwyn Hatfield on it, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. But the advice that I'm going to, or the information that I'm going to provide is certainly relevant for all of the Hertfordshire districts. And to be honest with you, it's quite broad in terms of how homelessness units deal with cases and the assistance that's available, and kind of the advice that is kind of given to people who approach those housing options teams. I'd say for the most part it's standard across the country really. We all operate under the same legislation, which is the Housing Act 1996, and it kind of the framework of that legislation alongside the guidance that is given by government really kind of underpins what we should do and how we should do it, and the kind of the spirit and the ethos that should be taken. But the Hertfordshire is a county which has 10 housing districts in it. And we deal with housing advice and homelessness. So people who are either in accommodation that know they're going to have to need alternative accommodation, or they're already homeless and need accommodation immediately. The local housing authority is really the place to refer to us as being like the housing and homelessness version of the citizens advice. You know, where when it comes to the step change, will probably have a problem with me describing it that way. But the financial side of things, people have a kind of, it's common knowledge as to where to go and get that advice. And I think that in terms of housing and homelessness, it's not common knowledge, I don't think, for people. And improve the understanding in the local community about where to go and get that advice, because the underlying importance of it is that the more we can do at an earlier stage, the more chances, you know, the prevention better than cure mentality. But what we often find is that people don't know about the services early enough. So we each individually try and raise the awareness locally. One of the main things I'd like to just say about, you know, housing options or housing solutions, or there's a couple of different ways to describe it, but we are very different to the housing departments that deal with council tenancies. So people who are in council housing will have a housing department that they go, and it may well be that some sponsors are council tenants. When the scheme opened up, it was discussed about whether or not the council would you know, whether there would be an issue, or I don't want to say allow, but that's what I'm trying to say in terms of allowing tenants to open up to the sponsorship scheme. And there wasn't resistance. I don't know whether or not that differed district to district, but the housing departments within most councils that have council housing are separate to housing options. There's sometimes a conflict, because obviously if somebody's being asked to leave a council tenancy, we might be on the other side of the table from the people, essentially the colleagues who are evicting them because of whatever reason it might be, and us trying to prevent that. So there's a distinction between them, although it may not be that important for this group. And also different to housing allocations. So housing allocations deals with people who want to apply for council housing, although some councils combine that with options. So they may well be under a bigger banner. So who do we deal with? It's easier to think of it in terms of, you know, as broad as possible a group. We certainly don't exclude, if people might approach us and obviously it not be an issue for us and we redirect them, but broadly speaking, if it involves housing advice in terms of securing alternative accommodation or finding out more about what people's rights are and that kind of thing, it really falls to housing options to deal with those cases, either provide the advice or more assistance. We'll help with people who are threatened with homelessness. So the distinction between these terms is that somebody who isn't yet homeless, but they might be soon. So somebody who might have received a notice, somebody who might have been told that they are going to get a notice but haven't yet, but at some point in the near to distant future or near to medium future, they're going to have to find alternative accommodation. So that's the threatened with homelessness. Households who are actually homeless at the moment, so they have no accommodation at all. You know, that might be rough sleepers who are actually in a position of being out in the open. or there also might be households who are in unsuitable accommodation. So they do live somewhere, but it isn't sustainable, it isn't suitable, it might not be affordable, there might be disrepair, for whatever reason there might be, that there's a roof over their heads, but for whatever reason it isn't considered to be suitable for them. So that's kind of the very brief, but it all comes under that, people who are in housing need. Moving on to how we help. So every district tries to do what it can to increase the amount of accommodation available to it, because we're all inundated with people. You know, there is a housing crisis. The amount of people who are in housing need is increasing across the board. So there are different strategies. Each individual area kind of has its own priorities and what the resources get put into in order to maximize that. And basically what we want to get to a position of, that anybody approaching us for advice or assistance, there is a mechanism by which we can actually make that a very short period of time that we can assist them into new accommodation. Now, it doesn't often work like that at the moment. You know, just speaking from Welwyn Hatfield's point of view, we're trying to increase the amount of work we do with local landlords and agents, so that when people approach us, the conversation is quite brief and we can offer them several alternatives, and then it's a very short-lived case. And how we do that is to put money into different either projects or expanding the nature of our team to deal with a higher amount, so we have more capacity to deal with those. But nearly every council, I would expect, has some sort of scheme to help secure tenancies. So that will either be help with deposits, or actually not either. It's going to include all of these things. Help with deposits, help with rent costs, the assistance to claim benefit where it's needed. And usually there are other sundry items that will help people, either help with moving, you know, as well as the stress of moving, which is kind of commonly known. You know, there's usually a lot of expense that goes, and people just simply don't have that money. So a lot of the schemes that we have, whether or not it's to be repaid as a loan or a grant, is to help people with the initial cost of securing somewhere else. Switching to the advice that is, you know, for this group, I think that the initial thing to point out is that there is a rematching service. So for those individuals who are with sponsors, and that sponsor, you know, for whatever reason, that accommodation might soon be coming to an end, it's important to contact the necessary department of county to try and find a rematch, so that sponsorship, even though it's with a different sponsor, that can continue. The scheme is still open. It's important to make contact with the local authority that's dealing with that, which in this case is Herts County Council. But because there's a limit on the amount of sponsors available that are known to county, there is also the possibility of community rematching, so that the individual families can, in the same way that I think probably the original sponsors were found, for other sponsors to be found. And when they are found, to contact the council and let them know, just so they don't fall out of the scheme, and obviously the payments that are able to be made to the sponsors can continue. I can share, and in a moment I'll put the email address for that into the chat, so that people can know where to make that contact. But really the kind of ideal scenario, if you like, if that's not the wrong phrase to use, is for an alternative sponsor, if the existing sponsor can't be, if there's not something that can be done to maintain the existing sponsorship, is to find a different sponsor, and that rematching can assist with that, because then there's no need to get other assistance, and there's no need to take sometimes quite a lot of work into try and find other accommodation. And I mean that from the household's point of view, not just making it sound as if you know, we're trying to limit the amount of authorities' work, although that obviously that's relevant. So that's something I wanted to say first. But if that really isn't, you know, looks like it isn't possible, then attempts to try and extend the stay kind of taken aside, it is important that steps be taken to start looking for other accommodation. and for all options to be considered. So other areas is going to be part of that, different types of housing. So any accommodation, you know, we can get different types of property that might be considered, you know, a flat rather than a house, or a smaller property that might be reasonable for a short period of time, really to try and this is something that the advice is given to, you know, every customer that comes into us, to really try and consider and be open to the idea of as many different housing types as possible. And I think that I've got a couple of things to be aware of to run through, that just where we are in the world. Hertfordshire is an expensive area of the UK. You know, the counties that surround London and other areas of the southeast, and as you start to kind of go out from London, really, that commuter belt is an extremely expensive area, and actually there's often a gap between what the rent of a property will be and what assistance you're able to get, and quite often that gap makes properties unaffordable. That isn't the case for all of the country, and there are other areas of the country that are less expensive. And so what we want to try and encourage is for people to consider to move to other areas. I mean, we do this across the board, so it's not that this is only advice that is relevant to this group, but to try and, it falls under that, just try and widen your search as much as possible, and see whether or not, though, you know, there's accommodation available in other areas. The area that you're currently in, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I would imagine that assistance is still going to be possible, and certainly in conversations we're having with Herts County Council to try and increase the amount of assistance that is given to families that need to relocate or find other accommodation. That assistance will still be available for people who are moving outside of the district. And I think the other side of that coin is that if councils find accommodation, it's almost certainly going to be in other areas, just because of the limits on local accommodation. So most districts work with agencies or companies that link up with accommodation in other areas. So if it is that accommodation isn't found, and you need to seek the assistance of the local authority for actually finding accommodation rather than just helping securing it, to be expected that they're going to search. You know, I can speak for well in Hatfield. That search is going to include other districts in order to make the property affordable. And it's all about sustainability. It's not, I don't want it to be kind of taken in that we're just trying to relocate people away from our district. It's important that we make sure that any accommodation found is sustainable, and that needs to be affordable. There's no point in moving people into a property that 2 months later they're already in arrears and can't afford it, because of the stress and anxiety that brings to households without, you know, the additional problems that are already being experienced. So I just want to kind of make that point. And in more of a positive sense, if you do wish to stay local, finding your own accommodation and having that input into where your home is going to be, however, you know, for however long of a period it's going to be, just improves the sense of well-being about finding that new accommodation. We see that across the board, and so I don't think that's going to be no different with this group. So that was the end of my little spiel. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to come in, but I'm opening it up for questions now. Are there any questions from anybody?
Carmen, would you like to come to David with your question that you put in the chat?
Oh, sorry,
or
the
David.
chat.
No, of course, or David and colleagues, perhaps.
Okay, just basically last week we heard of a young lady who limited English, very traumatized, separated from her mother who has been placed in Italy, and relationship with her sponsor has not gone very well, and she's been made homeless. She's been to the council, and the option she was given was, through a translator, was either to go to the YMCA or find private accommodation. Now, going to private accommodation with limited English is one barrier in itself, you know, and not knowing the area and not knowing where to go. And I just thought that was a lack of empathy on the council side.
To be honest with you, I think that it is, I mean, it's these kind of conversations away from the schemes that we're talking about. it is sometimes about building that bridge between kind of understanding expectations on the one side of the table, if you like, and actually what local housing authorities are kind of faced with in terms of finding options. And I think that I would, without knowing the details of the case, I don't necessarily think that advising about the possibility of a YMCA is necessarily lack of empathy. I think it's probably more of an indicator of the lack of options available. I think that private sector, the advice to look for somewhere in the private sector is so much of a part of what we do because of the lack of alternatives. So often, and I don't want to read between the lines too much, but often when people say about private sector not being the best solution, is what we find is meant by that is that social housing would be better, and no doubt it would, but there are many reasons why social housing isn't often the option. For the first point, that there's just simply not enough of it to provide everyone with accommodation, but there are also limits, and I probably should have mentioned this in terms of local authorities aren't likely to provide, or actually simply won't provide, accommodation for everybody who's homeless. As much as we are open up to providing advice and assistance, that doesn't always extend to actually providing accommodation, which is why often the advice for people to find their own accommodation is usually the main advice for people who we don't have a duty. So families with children are in a group which will receive assistance because of the obligation or the safety net to make sure that we don't have families with children without any accommodation. Single individuals, which I presume from what you've put in the chat that I'm looking at, it might have been a single individual. They wouldn't, depending on their vulnerability and any medical conditions and health and that kind of thing, there might not have been a duty upon to actually provide accommodation for that person. So therefore, once we remove the, we do these things in a certain order, but once we've assessed whether or not a council has to provide accommodation, if that's not the case, then we kind of move to saying, well, what is available in the local area? The YMCA might be a part of that. I think that, in terms of stopping it from happening again, that's just simply, I think we need to just reframe in terms of what options are available, because whilst it might not be an ideal way of support, but it is more of a factor in terms of what the reality is. We'd like to not, it's not to say that we'd prefer not to put people into YMCA, because YMCA does a lot of good, and it's the support that is provided. It's not just accommodation, that support is important as well. But I think it's more of a factor in terms of the limits. This is where actually my point earlier about working with private sector landlords is important, because the more we can do in terms of being aware of what's available locally, and that example I gave about people coming into us, and actually that if the first option was, right, we've got these different properties and they're in these different areas, let's sort out viewings, that time between being homeless or that first contact and actually finding something else, if that can be minimized as short as possible, then it might be possible to get an extension as to where somebody already is.
But sorry, David, but my point is exactly that. There's a gap missing at the moment, because had there been that gap put in place, she wouldn't have struggled and ended up to the voluntary sector to take care of on a Friday afternoon. So if there was a liaison between the council and the landlord, with somebody with limited English can't go into an estate agent and say to them, I need a room or something, and the council's going to pay for it or something like that. They just
that's what I'm trying to say, though, that it's the assistance in terms of providing a room and the council paying for it. I think it's that part of it that the YMCA is essentially providing, because the councils won't provide accommodation for everybody who's homeless. There's just one, it's in the legislation, and the resources aren't there. So there are groups at which the councils do have a legal obligation to assist with accommodation. And if somebody isn't in that, if there isn't a legal obligation, and I'm framing it like that because it kind of cuts to the core of it. There are duties and there are requirements, But if somebody doesn't fall within the group at which councils have to accommodate, then we do have to look for other options, and YMCA is one of those other options.
David, would you mind if I just came in really quickly on this as
Of
well?
course.
Hi, I'm Jenny Brace from County Council, and I would just say that that there is additional support for these groups, and actually Flourish is your front door to that. So in the case that you were mentioning, Carmen, you know, if in any doubt that you think somebody's going to need additional front support, then please refer straight away to Flourish, because it's not just Flourish. There's an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes about all of these issues. But Flourish is the kind of the route into all of that. So I just really encourage that if you're worried about these, then Flourish is that first point, and we're doing more work to make sure that Flourish then sort of links up with the additional support that we're putting in place as well. It's not all there, it's not all perfect, and I just want to support what David was saying as well. We've got to be really realistic here. Hertfordshire housing situation is really difficult, it's incredibly challenging, and as I say, please do not for a moment think that we haven't thought about this. It's just that there is no easy solution. So we are definitely doing a lot of work behind the scenes to try and put more in place and to give more guidance and different kinds of support. But I just wanted to sort of support what David was saying. It's challenging and it's difficult and it's limited in what can be done. But if in doubt, contact Flourish, and we will do our best to do more as well.
Thank you.
And just to, you know, at the risk of sounding absolutely ultimately defensive, because I'm not sure about the case, but just in terms of what we do, it won't have been the only option. I think it won't have been, you know, YMCA or find your own and that be the end of the conversation. There is more detail or nuance, a bit more colour on than that. But and obviously, if that's not the case, and anybody feels as if more could have been done, then I think all of us that manage these housing options services, you know, we want to be able to know that the services we manage kind of live up to what we describe. So please do feed that back if you think that isn't the case. But I think that there's often a lot of more conversation and more detail given. But sometimes if we're faced with dealing with the immediate homelessness, you will kind of reach for whatever levers are immediately available before we can then get into a bit more of the detail.
Yeah, and just to sort of add as well, I completely agree with what David's saying. YMCA does do a lot of support. So when we talk about voluntary sector, I know that a lot of it looks like it's just the voluntary sector doing it, but a lot of that is actually being commissioned as well by councils, and we work really closely in partnership with those partners, and they do an excellent job. So, you know, it's a whole systems approach really, and everybody is kind of trying to pull their weight on it. More needs to be done. I do think that is true, and we are really on that at the moment. So yeah.
There was a question in the chat from Michelle just about, can we have some guidance on private renting for our guests? Is it possible there could be a bit more detail in terms of in terms of guidance on private renting? Was there anything specifically that I could advise on?
Yeah, we're quite lucky. Our guest has just secured a job, but travelling is a bit of a problem for her from where we are and where she needs to get to. So she's looking to see if she could rent locally, but I have no idea how she goes about this or what kind of deposit she needs or guarantor or what, you know, whatever. Just a little bit of guidance would be great.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of, I mean, again, speaking for myself, but being fairly secure and speaking for other districts in Hertfordshire, I mean, we do direct people to online resources, but it used to be the case that local councils kept a kind of, I suppose, an unofficial list of local letting agents, but that was, you know, before such resources became available online, and it's so you know, it is so easy to then find out the information. If you were to say Google, you know, private property in choose a district, the amount of resources there, kind of, it's not worth it's not reasonable for councils to kind of maintain that list anymore. So we do, you know, at the risk of sounding possibly unhelpful towards some people by directing them online, it's just more of a productive way of finding it. But you're not going to know what's required unless the letting agent or the landlord will. It's almost certain that a deposit will be needed. And as I've said, you know, the districts and working with county are looking into ways to assist with that. But every council has some resource in terms of helping people to secure tenancies. But until you know exactly what's needed for that individual property, some people require reference checks. Obviously, that's going to be difficult in this, and we're working on a scheme to try and you know, kind of shortcut that, because people aren't going to have those references and aren't going to have that credit checks. Although locally we've been able to get past that by some of the we provide some insurance for rent guarantee, which a lot of agents are now accepting. So instead of a credit check, they would work with the local authority. So that's where the assistance, you know, our contacts can come in. But to try and find a property, it really is the kind of open market, looking online, and not a risk of falling foul of any recommendations. But Rightmove, everybody seems to use Rightmove in terms of looking for properties. If it's a single individual, then you have websites like Spare Room, or, you know, but a Google search will catch all of those, because we've actually done a bit of a training exercise. You know, what would we do for new starters, and how to advise people. So finding out what is needed for an individual property, and then if assistance is needed because they don't have the funds themselves, to the local authority, that whole process can be quite quick turnaround, because it's in our interest to make it as short a process as possible, really.
Thank you.
I've also put in the chat the links to the government guidance around how to rent, and there's a Ukrainian translation, link to the Ukrainian translation there as well. So hopefully that.
Thanks, Eleni. Were there any other questions?
Claire, did you have your hand up?
I was just making a point, really, on Michelle's question, that I didn't know if she'd already explored it. I've sent her a message anyway to say that I don't know if this is an option, but if your guest wants to move closer to her work, then whether you might want to explore rehosting in an area near to her work, and whether that's possible.
Yep, thank you. We have explored that, but she actually wants to stay with us. She doesn't want to go unless it's into her own property. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks ever so much, David, for that excellent update. Really appreciate it. The next presentation is going to be Melanie from Citizens Advice Stevenage. Melanie, are you there?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Thanks very much, Melanie. Yeah, we can indeed.
No problem. Do you need me to share my screen, or have you already got the presentation?
Yeah, I've got the presentation, so I'll you just let me know when you're ready.
Oh, I'm ready now.
Slide,
yes,
Melanie.
yeah.
Fine. Okay.
So while we're waiting for that to go up, so I'm Melanie, I'm from Citizens Advice Stevenage, but I'm here to talk about the services that are available across Citizens Advice Hertfordshire. Lovely, presentation's just on its way. Okay, so for those of you that don't know about Citizens Advice, so we provide free, confidential and impartial advice to help people overcome their problems. We also aim to provide a voice for our clients and consumers on issues that matter to them. So we part of our work is doing sort of research and campaigns work, which I'll touch on a bit later on. And then there's just a bit to say we kind of value diversity, champion equality and challenge discrimination, and we are here for everybody. I think there's a lot of confusion, particularly amongst people who aren't from the UK, that because our service has got the word citizens in it, that it's not for them. That's very definitely not the case. Next slide, thank you. So, like I said, we provide confidential and impartial advice, and our goal is to help everybody find a way forward with the problems that they face. People come to us usually not just with one problem, or they'll come with a presenting problem, but actually there are lots of other problems that when we start talking to them that are sort of underlying those. So we don't just look at somebody's presenting issue, we will look at and try and sort of resolve where we can all of the issues that are happening in their lives, and where we're not the right organisation to help them, we will signpost or refer to other organisations that can help. We've got really good kind of referral pathways for doing that. People come to us, like I said, with all kinds of problems. So from debts to benefits to housing to consumer. I'll come on in a second to the sort of areas that we can help with. And Citizens Advice Hertfordshire, we are kind of a collective of 10 offices that do work together, but each office is its own kind of separate entity and may have sort of different projects that they're running and may work sort of slightly differently, have different opening hours, that type of thing. But I'll come on a bit later to sort of let you know where the offices are. Next slide, please. So we cover a range of issues. This just kind of highlights the main ones, but it is fair to say that people can come to us with any problem and have. And like I said, if we're not the right person or organisation to help them, we will signpost or refer onto an organisation that can help. So in terms of, I said, we sort of touch on research and campaigns. So if, for example, there were issues that were arising and were specific to people who were coming from Ukraine, and we identified that there was a pattern there, then our advisors will raise what we call an evidence form, so that if there's then kind of an emerging trend with issues that they are facing as a community, then it's possible that National Citizens Advice would pick that up and then possibly campaign for change at a higher level. Next slide, please. So like I said, there are 10 offices across Hertfordshire, so they're all sort of listed there. So each district has a Citizens Advice office, and we've got one sort of telephone number that people can call and get through to an advisor between 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. There is, on the Citizens Advice Hertfordshire website, there is an email advice, so you can, clients, host families, referral agencies can complete that, and then that will be filtered and sent to the appropriate local office. And the reason why I keep kind of referring to the local offices, because each local office is funded to help people who either live or work in their district. So it's not to say that if you contacted Welwyn Hatfield Citizens Advice and you lived in Stevenage, for example, that they wouldn't help. They would probably give you information, but wouldn't be able to give you full advice because they're not funded to do that. So they would then refer you on to your local Citizens Advice, but we wouldn't make a client sort of go and start that journey all again. We would do that internally, so it wasn't a poor journey for the client. Next slide, please. So there's lots of advice that we can provide. So there's sort of specific advice, and people either bringing family members from Ukraine to the UK, so we can check if they can sponsor a family member, who they can sponsor, who their family members are able to bring with them, how their family members can apply to come to the UK, their family members' rights when they're living in the UK, and then advice once the sort of Homes for Ukraine scheme, so we can provide advice on checking if somebody can apply, checking whether hosting will affect their finances, what hosting means, how to apply, and what happens when the guest visa comes to an end, and what happens when they arrive in the UK. So that's just kind of a brief sort of overview of what we can do. I think it's really important to say that in terms of sort of citizens' advice, like I said, if somebody comes to us as a client and let's say they say, no, I'm going to host somebody from Ukraine, we'd not only run through sort of all of this in terms of, okay, this is who you can host, this is what they've got to do, this is what you've got to do. We'd also look at the wider issues. So, for example, how that's going to affect their finances, whether any of their benefits are going to be affected, whether they're claiming everything that they're entitled to in the first place, because obviously having somebody additionally in your household is going to impact on your finances, and any kind of income that you receive is going to be impacted and may well not be kind of fully compensated. We'd also look at, we can also provide advice on sort of housing issues. Different offices have different kind of levels of advice they can provide. So for example, at Citizens Advice Stevenage, we've got a dedicated homelessness and housing case officer. We've got debt advisors. I think all of the Citizens Advice officers across Hertfordshire have got sort of dedicated debt advisors. So if the Holmes families were kind of worried about debts, particularly in the light of the current cost of living and energy crisis, then once they've had this kind of generalist level of advice about what they can do and what support is available, but then through conversations with them it came to light that they had other underlying issues, we can then refer them on to sort of specialists. So there's an awful lot of support that we can provide. We also administer the Household Support Fund on behalf of Hertfordshire County Council. So if any either people who have come from Ukraine or host families are struggling financially, then on a case-by-case basis, we can look to see whether we are able to offer them any support through that in terms of supermarket vouchers that will offer a bit of help. We can make referrals to food bank vouchers. We can make applications for grants. Depends again on local assistance. So local sort of charities that are able to support with heating grants or grants for cookers, things like that. We would refer back to Hearts Help in some cases. So there's an awful lot that we can do sort of at a local level within each Citizens Advice office to support people. And next slide, please. And I've just put up there the sort of contact details for Hertfordshire Citizens Advice. And that's it.
Thanks very much, Melanie. That was really great. Thank you. So I'm just wondering if Eileen is now able to join us and present.
Hi, can you hear me?
Can indeed. Great. That's great.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just get these slides back.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thanks. So I'm Aileen Hargrave. I'm a Fair Access Officer in Hertfordshire School Admissions and Transport, and our team oversees all the school applications for Ukraine children coming in. So I'm just going to go through briefly how to apply for a school place, the general process and the information that we need to process an application. So when families are applying for a school place in Hertfordshire, they can make a preference for up to 4 schools. They don't have to list 4, but obviously if it gives them a chance to think about other schools in the area, they can list those 4 on there. When processing the application, if there is a place available for the child at the school of preference, then we will allocate it. If not, we will allocate the nearest available school to the home address. Ukrainian children don't take priority on the continued interest list for a school place. So this is DfE guidance. What we need to do is process all applications in line with the school's admissions criteria. So any child coming in will be ranked in accordance to how well they meet the school's rules. When we receive an application for a child, we are unable to offer a place until we know that they are here in the UK and can take up that school place. So I'll go through the evidence of what we need, but part of that is evidence of their arrival into the UK. We won't be able to process that application without that. Once we're processing an application, once we've got a complete application, so we've got all the evidence that we need, a school place should be offered within 10 to 15 school days of the complete application. This can increase when there's no vacancies in the local area. And we, like I say, we do work to school days rather than calendar days as well. So where we've got the summer holidays, the applications can take a little bit longer to process. So to apply for a school place to start straight away, applicant will need to go onto our website. So I'll put the link on there for the application to follow. This can be submitted by the parent or by the host on behalf of the family. If it is by the host on behalf of the family, we just ask for written confirmation of their relationship to them. And we ask that it's clearly indicated on the application form that it is for a Ukrainian child, so we can record it as such. To process the application, we need the following evidence. So we need proof of the address that the family are living in. So we need 2 documents that are dated in the last 3 months. One must be a council tax or a utility bill. If a family are living with a host family, we ask that the hosts provide the documents in their name and provide a covering letter just to confirm that they're living with them. We obviously do not expect the Ukraine family to have the required evidence in their name if they're living with a host family. So it is sufficient to have the host's evidence received. For proof of arrival, it can be that they have a date stamped passport. So we just need the photo page and the date stamp. It could be a boarding pass or a booking confirmation. And we also require confirmation of the scheme that the child has arrived under. So that's whether they're here living with friends and family or here living under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Thank you. So home to school transport, we do get a lot of queries about child's entitlement to transport to school. So whenever a school place is allocated, we will assess for their transport entitlement at the time of the allocation. And within the allocation letter, we will detail whether they're either entitled to transport, or if they're not entitled to transport, we will let them know why. So generally speaking, transport will only be offered if a child is attending their nearest available school, which is over statutory distance. So the statutory walking distance for a child under the age of 8 is 2 miles, and over the age of 8 is 3 miles. So parents can apply for transport under low income, or if they think that they might be eligible in terms of safety, if they think the route to school is unsafe. But these cases are assessed individually. So once a school place is offered, we would ask that the family contact us via email to let us know why they think they should be entitled to transport, and then we can go into those in a little bit more detail with the family. So I put the contact details for us. The contact number is through our customer service centre, and they can transfer the call over to us or ask us any questions. And we've got a dedicated Ukraine school admissions email address there as well, which is managed by my team. So any queries in regards to school places or transport for Ukraine students should be directed to that email address. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Eileen. Thank you. So just before we move on to the close, which includes help and support, which Carmen Dillon is going to present, I just wanted to say that Anne Stokes from Department of Works and Pensions does apologise for the technical problem that she had earlier in not being able to present her employment support slides, but her email address has been added to the notes section on this webinar if anybody's got any queries. And obviously the slides will remain in the slide deck. So without further ado, I'm just going to bring up the slide for Carmen. Over to you, Carmen. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Gary. You've heard from a number of organisations today. We would like to thank you all, to thank all the presenters, and thank you all for attending. We hope that you found the information useful, and if you need any contact, there's a list of other contact agencies here, including Hearts Help, which is run by the Hearts County Council and a very helpful telephone service. Here at CVS and all the CVS locally, there are further help, so please get in touch and let us know how we can help you further. Thank you.
Thanks, Carmen. And that actually brings this webinar to a close. I'd like to thank everybody for attending and for those presentations that were provided. And if anybody's got any further queries, as I say, we've shared a whole host of contact details, so we will respond accordingly. And again, thank you all for joining.